Welcome to more World of Warplanes content from the Noble Q. In this video I'm revisiting the Tier 6 American heavy fighter, the P-38L Lightning. Hello there, and here on the tarmac outside my hangar is the P-38L Lightning, an iconic World War II aircraft, one of the most recognisable with its twin booms, and the L was the most produced variant. I last looked at this aircraft back in July 2022 when it was introduced into the game, and I feel it's time for a reassessment. It differs from its tech tree counterpart, the P-38J, by having lower caliber weaponry but more ordnance, should you choose to mount it. So let's look at the aircraft's numbers. Here's a spreadsheet showing all of the Tier 6 heavies. There are 8 of them, as you can see. If you don't know how this spreadsheet works, there's a link in the description below to a video that you can go and watch, and then you'll know what's going on here. Just as a reminder, in these comparisons, the configuration of the aircraft is stock, ordnance where available is mounted, equipment is removed and the pilot sent back to the barracks. The modules are all the top ones. If we turn our attention to the gun armament on the P-38L Lightning, the rating is 20 and the cumulative DPS at 345, and this may actually seem quite underwhelming compared to some of the other aircraft. Even the P-38J right next to it has a rating of 25 and apparently much higher cumulative DPS. The Volti, XP54, 32508, the Hornice, the ME410, 36 and 600, and so on and so on. And you may be forgiven for thinking, well, that's not very good. And if we looked below, we can see that indeed it is second worst in class in theory. However, there are some saving graces here. First off, the range on both sets of weapons groups is 2,300 feet, there or thereabouts. And for me, this makes them much more workable than the P-38J's weaponry, which is limited to just about 2,000 feet in the case of its 50 cals, and even less, 1,772 feet for its big 37mm cannon. And honestly, I can say that between these two aircraft, I prefer the weaponry on the P-38L. Yes, you're not going to go head-on with an XP54 or an ME410. You need to arrange your battling so that you take on those aircraft at a disadvantage. So, for instance, with the ME410, you will outmaneuver it. And that doesn't matter how you build the Lightning, you should be able to outmaneuver an ME410. The XP54 we'll talk about a little bit later, but there are techniques you can use against that as well. Again, with the Key 102, you need to catch that in a low energy configuration, use your speed against it, you're not going to outmaneuver it. The Mosquitoes, of course, both of them, more biased towards what I would call ground attacking. They should be easy meat, but then they might be lower than you're flying in the game. There's a point about the otherwise insipid XP50 Grumman that you need to know about, and we'll discuss that in a little bit as well. So just looking at the detail on the armament, we have 3 15mm I suppose they are cannons really, they're just getting into that territory, but I'll call them machine guns. And they've got an auto-aim angle of 2, which is tight, you're going to have to aim, but a very good dispersion angle, and that's the way that the bullets spread out as they leave the muzzle of the gun of 0.4, that's very good accuracy, and a good overheat time of 20 seconds, and then a shell velocity, which is pretty good at 1,312 feet. You need less lead. If you just look at the other machine guns along this comparison, you can see that their shell velocities are much lower, making them much harder to land if an aircraft is banking away from you that you're trying to shoot. And it's a similar story with the 20mm cannon as well. Auto-aim angle is tight, you need to aim, but the dispersion angle is excellent at 0.4 again. And the overheat time is a pretty good 10 seconds. And again, that shell velocity is relatively high, 1,312. The only other aircraft with a similar shell velocity is the Grumman XP50, and that's because it has the same cannon. And again, what this means is that you will be able to hit with all your weapons groups, if you hit at all, at a banking aircraft at some distance, and that's a considerable advantage. You can see it's not necessarily going to be the case with the Lightning. It's certainly not the case with the ME410. It will be the case with the Volti, however. No defensive armament, so we'll skip over that. Ordnance. Ordnance is excellent. It's best in class, and you can, if you know what you're doing, flip the entirety of a neutral mining plant with this ordnance. and certainly get a long way into flipping even an enemy mining plant with this ordnance. Of course, the disadvantages are that if you're using ordnance, you're exposing yourself to enemy aircraft because you go into a low energy configuration. But many people will really enjoy this ordnance. It's better than, for instance, the Mosquito's ordnance, and that's saying something. We'll talk more about ordnance later in the video. Survivability, well, for a heavy, it's on the low side, as you might expect with the Lightning. 350 hit points, rating is 9. The damage resistance is 50, however, and the fire resistance is 65, which is best in class. Mind you, that's shared with almost all of the heavies, but that's great. It means that you don't have to worry about mounting, for instance, a fire extinguisher or expending skill points on firefighting or fire resistance. Airspeed is good, but again, we're going to talk about that later in the video as well. Remember, we've got ordnance loaded here. Rating is 55, cruise 307, boost maximum speed 388, just a little bit less than the third P-38J Lightning. Boost duration is 25 seconds, that's pretty much standard. There are some of the heavies with 30, but it's not a great deal of difference. Maximum dive speed is best in class at 559. I just want to draw your attention to that specifically. You're not going to see many of them in the sky, but if you are taken on by a Grumman XP50, I recommend you dive away from it. It's got a lower dive speed. Maneuverability, reasonably good at 39, but certainly not as good as some of the other heavies. The XP54 certainly will outmaneuver you. So will the Key 102. No surprises there. But for the rest of the heavies, you tend to be competitive. Might need to, again, to watch out for the XP50 here. So turn time to turn a full circle, 13.8 seconds. Roll rate, 88. Not great. Controllability, aircraft does tend to slide a little bit. This is on second best in class, but it's quite a low figure. Minimum optimum speed 230, maximum optimum speed 395. That's a fairly tight range in which the characteristics of the aircraft don't degrade. But if you're flying this as a high energy plane, and you probably will be, that's not going to matter so much. Stall speed, slamming on the brakes, that's probably not going to work in most cases, and people won't fly past you unless they're not paying attention. However, on the plus side, we have excellent altitude performance, best in class shared with the P-38J, unsurprisingly there, and the climb rate is third best in class, and it's only a couple of feet per second less than the P-38J. However, notice the Grumman XP50, the one thing that you shouldn't do with a Grumman XP50, which you might consider doing with all of the other heavies here, with the exception of the P-38J Lightning, is climbing away from them. And here we come to how I combat XP54s. For a start, you've got better altitude performance, and B, you've got a better climb rate. Now, if you're carrying a full load of ordnance, this possibly won't work, but you can stick your aircraft's nose in the air, fly straight up, and if you're high enough to begin with, and you're far enough away from an XP54, or indeed other pursuing aircraft, they will stall. And then you can do a hammerhead turn, fall upon them, and shoot them whilst they have a lack of control. And I regularly do this to XP54 pilots who are too confident in the power of their aircraft. If you remove the ordnance, then of course this figure is going to go, depending on how you build the aircraft, much higher. And then everything that I've just said may very well apply even to a P-38J Lightning, let alone most of the other heavies as well. I'd still dive away from an XP50, but as I say, you're not likely to see too many of those. Power to weight ratios, they're okay, but basically you don't really want to slow the aircraft down too much too often, because it's not going to accelerate away from other heavies. In fact, in some cases, it's not going to accelerate away from them at all. However, one thing you might very well be able to do is accelerate away from an XP54, particularly if, as I say, you're climbing. We're looking worst in class figures. We've already talked about the armament, which I think is better than it looks, personally. The feel of this armament to me is better than this. Survivability, lots of red there, no surprises. It's a fairly fragile heavy. Bearing in mind I've got the ordnance mounted, which I haven't shown here. Let's open that up, shall we? And there we go. We've got fairly low figures here. The boost duration, lots of the heavies is 25 seconds. Don't be worried by the bright red figure here, but you can do something about this. Again, as you probably begin to guess, I've got a trick up my sleeve regarding ordnance on this plane. Stall speed, you can see, is bright red as well. So where does this place this aircraft? Again, it's a plane which I wish we could select different builds for as we go into battle. For instance, if I was on a map with two mining plants, or perhaps a central mining plant, I'd want the ordnance on this plane. But in many other cases, despite that ordnance being best in class, I will take it off, and then what you get is a really fast air superiority heavy. And I'm going to demonstrate the effects of that in the post-build section coming up later in the video. Now we're going to look at how I set the aircraft up. My aircraft is specialised, which means I've got all of the equipment and consumable slots available. When you first get the aircraft, you will find the following. You have an equipment slot on the cockpit, nothing on the airframe, 2 on the engine, but one of those is locked, and 1 on the forward firing weapon. There is nothing for the ordnance. You cannot improve the ordnance with equipment or consumables. And on the consumables, you have 5 slots again, 1 on the cockpit, 1 on the airframe, 2 on the engine, but again 1 is locked initially, and then 1 on the forward firing weaponry. Let's pop it back into specialist configuration and let's see what I've done with the aircraft. In the cockpit slot, you have 2 choices, the gun sight or cockpit armour. I think probably most people will choose a gun sight. I don't see any value in mounting cockpit armour here. And in this case, I have a piece of experimental equipment which will confer extra accuracy. The equipment is at ultimate level, but as you can see, it is not calibrated at all. It's still at level 400. So at the moment, it has 16% improvement in accuracy. That's the dispersion being tightened up. And 10.5% adverse effect on the pilot's resistance to injuries. If you do fully calibrate it, you can get that accuracy improved by 23%. In return for a further 5% hit on the pilot's ability to resist injury. As far as the bonus characteristics are concerned, my philosophy with this weaponry is, because it's fairly low DPS, if I'm shooting at something, I want to cripple it or set it on fire. So I've gone for 20% chance of inflicting critical damage. Remember, the bonus characteristics here are a bit different for this piece of equipment. It is experimental compared to the standard, and also a 10% chance of causing a fire. There's a 7% chance of inflicting critical damage as well. I don't know why you would pick that. If you want critical damage, you'll pick the 10%ers. You can also have an extra 5% accuracy when firing at moving targets. Remember, the dispersion angle is all really good, so I don't think that's necessary. Conversely, because the auto-aim angle is so bad, the 3% accuracy when firing at moving targets, 3% improvement on that is not going to give you very much. So those are the best characteristics for me. I prefer to cripple my opponents as I fly past them, which then gives me the option of fleeing if I wish to, or perhaps turning on them when they can't do anything about it. We can skip over the airframe because you can't do anything with equipment on that. And then for the engine, I have 3 choices of equipment, which are the 2 that I've got mounted, the uprated engine and the boost mixture injection system, or you can have a lightweight power unit, which will confer more maneuverability. My approach to that is that it doesn't matter what you do with the lightweight power unit on the Lightnings, you're not going to make them as manoeuvrable as an XP-54 or a Key 102, so why bother? And therefore I don't. That leaves the other 2 pieces of equipment, and I like to make this aircraft as fast as possible. So the choices of an uprated engine and the boost mixture injection system really suit me. Let's deal with the boost mixture injection system first, since I've got it highlighted. This piece of equipment is ultimate level, but it is not fully calibrated. It is partially calibrated. As you can see, it's up to 416 here. But there's a long way to go, and if we do fully calibrate it, we can see that we'll go from 7.5% acceleration improvement and 4.3 maximum speed with boost activated improvement at the cost of 18% boost availability loss to 10% improvement in acceleration with boost activated and a 5.8% maximum speed with boost activated improvement, and at this point we've lost 20% of our boost. On the bonus characteristics, boost availability, well, counteract that 20%, or as it is at the moment, 18% loss with a 5% improvement in the boost availability. And then I've got 15% engine cooldown rate. The other characteristics, you can improve the acceleration with boost, you can improve the maximum speed by 1%, you can increase the maximum speed by another 0.5%. I've got another way of improving the speed of this aircraft, so I'm not going to pick those bonus characteristics. On the uprated engine, we can see that this is again ultimate level equipment, but again it is not calibrated. It's not calibrated at all. So at the moment I've got a 6.5% acceleration without boost improvement and a 3.7 improvement in the cruise speed, and that's at the cost of a 23% reduction in the ability to resist fire. Bonus characteristics, I've got another 5% engine cooldown rate, 1% acceleration without boost, and 0.5% maximum speed with boost activated. If I was to fully calibrate this piece of equipment, we would get another 10% acceleration without boost and another 5.8% improvement on cruise speed. We would then have a 33% reduction in the ability to resist fire, and you might need to do something about that. And what I would recommend is something that I haven't done so far. That's pick off the 10% resistance to fire bonus characteristic down there. At the moment, I've got the other three that I've selected. I'd probably keep the 5% engine cooldown rate. I want to get that boost back as quickly as possible, and then pick off the resistance to fire, and then pick off whichever of those other two characteristics appeal to you the best. I would probably go for another 1% cruise speed, for instance. Turning to the forward-firing weaponry, we have three choices. Reinforced bolt carriers, which increases the burst length. Well, the burst length on both weapons groups is excellent. I don't see the need to do that, so that's not my choice of equipment. Long gun barrels, however, are going to appeal to some. The range at 2,300 feet for me is as good as I need it to be. Others who can hit more accurately at longer range may very well like to go for the long gun barrels. For two reasons. A, they can hit at that longer range. My poor eyesight won't allow it. And also, it doesn't affect the accuracy of the guns, although that's already excellent. And long gun barrels will probably put the range up to 2,600 feet, I guess. And those of you who can shoot at those kinds of ranges and reliably hit your aircraft may very well prefer this piece of equipment. However, because of the low DPS of these guns, my preference is for gas-operated action to increase the rate of fire. Now, this does decrease the accuracy, but the increased DPS is welcome to me. And in my case, I have fitted a piece of experimental equipment again. As we can see, this is fully calibrated and ultimate level, of course. And for that, we get 18.8% rate of fire improvement, which is basically just very nearly 20% improvement in your DPS. Very welcome indeed. But you lose very nearly 10% of accuracy. Bonus characteristics selected at the moment are 10% cooldown rate of the forward-firing armament, another 5% burst length, and in fact that's 10% burst length because there's two of those bonus characteristics selected. Your alternatives here could go for the 6% chance of causing a fire. That would be welcome on top of the 10% I've already got from the gun sight. Another 5% damage inflicted by forward-firing weaponry. Well, if you are concerned about DPS, this is a bonus characteristic you should have. And indeed, I would reconfigure this and drop one of the current characteristics I've got, one of the burst length characteristics, and I would put that extra damage on immediately. And another 10% chance of causing a fire. Nice, but I've already got a 10% chance coming from the gun sight, so that's not my choice there. So let's take a look at the consumables. Fairly standard package from me on this occasion. I have the first aid dressing package. I don't feel the need to mount a fire extinguisher. I certainly don't feel the need to mount sparklers, smoke flares or fireworks. Again, if you have those in stock, sell them. They're credits for you. If I get into a fight perhaps with another Lightning, I prefer the pneumatic control assist. If I get my control surfaces damaged, I'm just going to try and fly away as fast as I possibly can, assuming my engine doesn't also get shot out, so I don't see the need for an emergency control system. If you're worried about fire, you could put on the exhaust bleed inerting system, and it is true that with this configuration as I currently have it, the aircraft does catch fire fairly often, although it very rarely burns itself out to destruction. For all fighters, I recommend you mount engine cooling. If you don't know what this does, this won't help you. This piece of text it just misleads you completely. But what it does, it gives you an extra 10%, an extra 10 seconds of boost on top of whatever boost you've currently got available. Beware, if you have no boost available, this won't take effect. We also have selected the bottle for manual engine restart. If you lose the engines and you're trying to build an aircraft which is as fast as possible, which is my approach here, then you're going to want this engine restart. However, if you really are going to take that risk, you can always put on the improved mixture control. And if you're going to use gold consumables, you can improve the effects of these pieces of equipment. And finally, with the universal ammunition mounted instead of standard ammunition, I'm not going to go through the gold, but probably you would take that if you are going to use gold ammunition, you're probably going to take the one for auto cannons, the fragmentation. Now, there is one further trick that I play here, and you probably know what's coming because of what I've said in previous sections, but we're just going to drop into upgrades. I demount bombs and the rockets. Now, you could probably demount one or other of these, perhaps just keep the bombs or the rockets to give you still the ability to tap the ground. But my preference is to take both sets of ordnance off and play this aircraft as a pure air superiority heavy, and we'll see the effects of that in the post-build section that's coming up. Before I do that, let's talk about pilot skills. The P-38L is of course a premium aircraft and therefore a crew trainer. You can put any American pilot in it and you get the benefit of extra training. Alternatively, particularly if you've fitted a lightweight power unit because you've decided you do want some manoeuvrability rather than speed, then a highly trained Elise Clark would be a good fit for this aircraft. The extra manoeuvrability coming from one of her skills that will apply to this plane will stand you in good stead. I would tend to use her only if I had Engine Guru 1 and Engine Guru 2 on her. I haven't, and therefore I haven't been using her. If you choose to keep the ordnance, another possibility is to increase the damage output of that ordnance by using Mary Loveheart. Now, the drawback here is you have to be in a steep and fast dive, which means you're running the risk of going into the ground. But if you're going to keep the ordnance, then you can consider Mary Loveheart. I didn't do either of those things. I wanted to select out a pilot with both Engine Guru 1 and Engine Guru 2, so I selected my Pancake pilot. And if I were building a pilot for the aircraft, given the approach that I use of dropping the ordnance and playing it as an air superiority heavy fighter, I would make sure that I get these three skills: aerodynamics expert, Engine Guru 1 and Engine Guru 2. Now, the Pancake, as it happens, really benefits from having Marksman 1 and Marksman 2 as well. They are excellent for this aircraft, the P-38L2, so there's no problem there. Alternative skills that you might consider, particularly cruise fight to get about between sectors more quickly, possibly battle tested to resist battle damage and pilot injury injury as well. And then a long way down the line, you might consider resilience. Let's go and have a look at post-build effects. Normally in this section, I show you the effects of my choices, equipment, bonus characteristics, pilot skills, etc. on the base characteristics of the aircraft. I haven't done that on this occasion. Instead, what I've done is I've dropped into the press account, I've selected the same equipment at ultimate level, but I've fully calibrated it. And that's what we're going to do here. In the first place, I have a build with ordnance and then the same build but without ordnance, so you can see the effect on speed. The base characteristics of the aircraft are in columns C and D. The build with ordnance, the effects are shown in columns E and F, and the difference between the two is shown in column G in absolute terms, in column H in percentage terms. And then we have the build without ordnance. The effects are shown in columns I and J. The difference between that and the base characteristics is shown in absolute terms in column K, and then in column L we have the difference in percentage terms. What I've done with the guns is common to both builds, so let's step through that now. We've got the rating up to 23, and the cumulative DPS has gone up by very nearly 20% to 412. You can see that the individual effects on rate of fire and DPS are shown here for the 15mm machine guns and here for the 20mm cannon. Range, of course, is unchanged. I didn't do anything about the auto aim angle. It's already so low as to make any effects I could apply to it not really worth having. But what I have done is got the dispersion angle down to 0.32, which is really accurate and is an over a 20% improvement. With respect to ordnance, I'm either carrying it or I'm not. You can't change the figures for the ordnance because there's no slot to do so. So it's a rating of 33 if I'm carrying the ordnance, and it's a rating of 0 if I'm not carrying the ordnance. Now you could mix and match this. You might choose to just carry the bombs or the rockets. I haven't tried that approach. If you have, let me know how it works in the comments below. Survivability, same for both aircraft because of the uprated engine, but bearing in mind in this case I've selected a bonus characteristic to ameliorate the effect. We've lost 23% of our fire resistance figure. It's down to 50. I'm comfortable with that, although I do notice that the aircraft does catch fire fairly frequently. Airspeed, with ordnance, we've still got an improvement of 8 points, very nearly 15%. The cruise speed has gone up to 353. That's a 46 mile an hour improvement. The boost maximum speed has gone up to 428, which is a 40 mile an hour improvement. Very nice. However, we've lost 15% of our boost duration, and that's gone down to 21 and a quarter seconds. No effect on the maximum dive speed. Eye-catchingly, we've got a 13-point improvement. That's very nearly 24% if we don't use the ordnance. And in this case, both the cruise and the maximum boost speed go up by 70 miles an hour. Well, 71 in the case of the cruise speed, as you can see there, while still losing 3 3/4 seconds of the boost. That makes this aircraft really fleet of foot, and I enjoy playing it when it's as fast as this. On manoeuvrability, we do have some positive effects across, and it's applicable to both builds. The rating has gone up to 41. That's a 5% increase. We've got the turn time down a little bit, a smidgen, by 0.28 of a second. We've got the roll rate up by 2 degrees per second. That's not very much, probably not going to make any difference. And we actually have a 2% improvement in your manoeuvrability here, and that's applicable to both builds. Altitude performance, we've got some nice effects. We got to a rating of 62. The climb rate has gone up to 431 feet per second, which is 75 feet per second improvement. That's big, and that's with the ordnance. As you can imagine, without the ordnance, it's even bigger, very nearly 100 feet per second, 96 here, although the rating remains the same. On the characteristics that don't have numbers in the UI, in this particular case, I went for, on the guns, a 10% chance of critical damage, 10% chance of fire, and a 10% improvement in the cooldown rate. Not quite the approach I was showing earlier, where I concentrated on criticals and fire and not the cooldown rate. Survivability, there's a difference here. I'm using a seasonal camouflage on the press account. I wasn't using a seasonal camouflage, and still am not using a seasonal camouflage on my regular account. Therefore, some of these figures will not be available to you unless you do the same. The 25% controllability when damaged is actually coming from a skill on the pilot, which I'll talk about in a moment or two, battle tested. The next three characteristics are coming from the seasonal camouflage, the 20% concealment, 10% AA damage tolerance, and 5% gunner damage tolerance. I've managed to improve the pilot's injury resistance by a small amount, 3%, but normally it's not an improvement, so that's good. But then we have lost 17% of engine damage resistance, and that's common to both builds. Also common to both builds are the characteristics which don't have numbers. We've improved the acceleration without boost by 24%, with boost by 24%, and we've got the 15% cooldown rate. Very nice. Manoeuvrability, I've already adverted to the 2% your manoeuvrability. Talking of the pilot, this pilot has battle tested, aerobatics expert, which I certainly wouldn't have prioritised, aerodynamics expert, engine guru 1 and 2, which I do prioritise, all three of those skills, marksman 1, and cruise flight. And in this case, I was using the improved mixture control to get a little bit more speed out of the aircraft. Right, I think it's time to go and see how the aircraft performs in battle. Here's a spreadsheet recording the outcomes of 20 battles fought in the P-38L Lightning. And normally I conduct these analyses across 25 battles, but by the time I got to the 20th battle, I didn't see the point in carrying on, and here's why. The win rate across those 20 battles was 85%, and bear in mind, none of these battles were fought whilst flying in a flight. This is all solo activity. My win rate as a good player who doesn't spam overpowered aircraft and doesn't fly in flights very often is 65%. So to be 20 percentage points above that strikes me as being significant. I did some further analysis on personal points, and I averaged across those 20 battles 13,709 points. Now my normal average is something under 10,500. And this 13,709 is statistically significant. It is very unlikely to be the product of chance. And what that suggests is that when I'm in the P-38L Lightning, without ordnance, given the way that I fly it, I'm a more powerful opponent, not because of my skills, but because this plane is powerful. Now, a note of caution should be sounded here. I was fortunate to be in Battle Tier 6 65% of the time in these battles. I don't know why, that's just something, the product which is the product of chance. And it is likely that had I been in more Tier 7 battles, these figures would have been depressed somewhat. Let's go through some of these details. Battle tier, as I've already mentioned, was average 6.4. More usefully, you can see that there's the 65% incidence of being in a battle tier 6 battle. Chevrons, I averaged 3.4. Maximum was 5. That is a Hero of the Sky medal, of course, and that happened 7 times across just 20 battles. That's a lot. Personal points We'll talk about the maximum here, 24,835, and there were other high-scoring battles. You're going to see a replay of the 16th battle here, where the personal point score was 20,640. There was an outlier battle, funnily enough, the very first one, where I only scored 6,605, and that battle was actually responsible for some of my worst scores across the board. Rank in the game by chevrons, averaged 1.5. There are lots of first positions here, as you can see, never came lower than 4th. Kills has this somewhat turquoise colour here because it's one of the class-specific missions for heavies. Averaged 12, or just over, maximum was 26, the worst was 4, it's that first battle again. Aerial target damage, as you can see, averaged over 5,500 and the maximum was just a little bit under 11,300. Now, there were no ground targets destroyed. I wasn't carrying ordnance, that's no surprise. There was a little bit of ground target damage where, when aiming at a low-flying aircraft, I hit ground targets. So as you can see, there's a 416 was my maximum damage to ground targets there. This is irrelevant, of course. Capture points, another one of the class-specific missions, averaged 347, maximum was 700, first battle 0. B/GAA kills. Class-specific mission. This is bomber or attack aircraft kills, and I averaged 4, maximum was 10, and only the last battle let me down where I didn't get any, even though that was a quick win, as you can see. And then deaths in battle, I averaged just 1 death per game, and the maximum was 3. And overall, this is a very powerful set of statistics, again supporting the idea that P-38L is a powerful plane in which you should do better than you do in most other planes. The map for the battle you're about to see is Plateau. It's the turning point variant. It has 5 sectors and they're laid out in the familiar 5 spots of a die shape. And what we have in the centre is a garrison, which is tactically important because it provides easy access to the other sectors, but strategically of little value. On one axis about the garrison, we have a pair of repair air bases. These, one each close to each spawn point. These are quite useful if you need to attack the enemy command centre. And then on the other axis, as I've just mentioned, we have command centres which release bomber flights to try and flip enemy sectors to your side. When we look at the order of battle, we can see that I have an A6M5, not a great map for that plane unless it's built for speed, which would be fairly unusual, and it's stock as well. Then we have myself in the P-38L Lightning. We have a very powerful, in theory, ME410, which is specialised. And then we have a PE2 M82 bomb, which is going to be very useful on this map, I believe, because it's quick and it reloads quickly. So, useful bomber. And then a BF-109E, down-tiered, but a very, very powerful plane if well flown. And then finally we have a B-17D Tier 5 bomber. And the enemy has an unspecialised F4U-1 Corsair. An unspecialised Spitfire DB605. Both of these can get about a bit, so this map won't be so bad for them as the A6M5. They then have a Mosquito that has lots of ground attacking capability, but isn't great, used as an air superiority heavy. In fact, I wouldn't use it as one of those. The enemy also has a PE2 M82 bomber, and then they also have a B-17D bomber at Tier 5, and then they have the IL-2. Now, looking at that order of battle, because we've got the ME410 and the P-38L versus a Mosquito, I would say that we should have had a distinct advantage. It didn't turn out that way, as you shall see. As we head into battle, I decide that I'm going to go to the repair airbase on the left first, rather than go to the command centre. The command centre possibly is slightly more important, but it doesn't have any heavies to attack. It only has light fighters. There are heavies at the airbase, and I'm ideally suited to try and take those out. So we climb, as well as gaining speed. Looking for the heavies to see what kind of attack pattern they've got, and there they both are. Decide which one I'm going to shoot first. Pick the right-hand one that's higher. Not paying any attention to me, set him on fire. It's because of what I've done with the gun sight, of course. Always good to get these sorts of extra damage in from the guns. Having finished him off, I then quickly finish off one of the light fighters, and that helps secure this repair airbase. Now, I always like to try and get hold of the command centre if there's a chance of taking it. It's 60% captured at this point. It's worth a go. It probably will be captured before I get there, but I can always break away and go back to the middle, and indeed it has been captured, or I can continue and perhaps try and capture it. I can see that there's a heavy going with me, so I decide to continue initially towards the command centre. Going to have a little diversion to look at this heavy first. Now, generally what the rest of the team do is head towards the centre, and with a bit of luck they'll capture it. So we put a few shots into the BF-110E. Lots of lead there, falling shots quite difficult. And I take that out. Below me there's an XP-44. Hit that quite hard and also set it on fire. It's finished off by one of my teammates. Now we can see that there's a lumbering IL-2 heading towards the centre. Not going to let that happen. Disappears briefly, and it comes back into view. And in fact there are two of them in a row here, so we're probably going to shoot both of them, although actually the Junkers 87, as it turns out, dives steeply and makes that impossible. Make sure I don't crash into the ground attacker. Set that one on fire as well. You can see how many fires I'm setting. Could have finished him off there, but I decide I'm going to finish off the Junkers first. We'll capture the sector. It's quicker to kill this one. Only because it was close, so it was on full health, but probably a lot of the shots would have missed if I'd fired at the other ground attacker first. Now, and we have the centre. So I ended up diverting entirely there, and now I can see that our command centre hasn't been captured by our team, so I'm off there to see if I can help there. Sizing up the target. See the ADA in front of me, that's probably going to be the first thing I shoot. It's on very low health, so that's an easy kill. Then I can shoot the Yak as well, make it take avoidance action rather than shoot me. Those guns hurt if they hit a lightning. That puts me on the tail of the PE-2 M82 bomber. Pretty good manoeuvrability here, but he can't cope with the manoeuvrability of the Lightning all the same, and I put him down. I finish off the Yak. We've turned this sector around, just need 1 or 2 kills in order to secure it. Spot a heavy. And that's nasty. That sets me on fire, that ram. We both survive, but then one of my team finishes it off. Spitfire DB605 comes in, but it's too late. We've now got this sector. And you can see me climbing. And I've also got the big arrow indicating the Spitfire highlighted. Shoots at my engine unbelievably at that distance. But now I've got 3,000 feet on him, and I know that he's not concentrating on me. I'm going to go after him. It's a good tip that you can use your key binding, which tells you which are your nearest targets, toggle through them, find out which ones are close, and then you can judge when you're going to use the hammerhead turn to come back down. So finish off that Spitfire. And now we're going to go in and address these 2 ground attackers that have come back into the centre. Now there was a heavy which I did not pay any attention to my right. I should have looked at that first. And now, having turned for the ground attacker, I've got to hope that somebody deals with the fighter, which is nearby me as well. So all in all, I'm not sure I actually played this particularly well. Nonetheless, I get away with it, and I've disposed of the 2 ground attackers, and now I'm putting the... metaphorically, I'm putting my foot to the floor and getting away and looking behind me to see what I can do once I've got some distance. And I decide that we might actually be able to do some work at this airfield, which would be good, since we're 3 sectors to 2 down. Pick on the Corsair. Just enough manoeuvrability to stay with it as it tries to evade the shots. Take that down. Knew there was a very low health ADA which I went to shoot and have destroyed. Now I decide that I'm going to pursue this BF-110E again. See if I can catch it before it gets out of the sector. It dives, and these shots are hard, and I decide I'm not going to follow him down into the ADAs. Turn round to see what else is available. an ADA which is actually shooting me, so probably need to get rid of that first, otherwise it will do it again. And there it is. Managed to manoeuvre onto its tail. Now, at this point we're 4 sectors to 1 down. It's not looking good, despite, in theory, having aircraft which should have been able to dominate this battle. Don't quite finish off that ADA, don't make the mistake of turning with it. There's another one behind it, and this time I aim a lot better. And this one I do destroy. But I've spent a lot of time over here, already got a hero of the sky, and we're nowhere near taking this sector. There's still very nearly half of it to take. Corsair is trying to climb to get to me. I use the same trick of checking its distance. I know it must be stalling by now. In fact, he actually recovers really well, and he manages to ram me and destroy me. We come back into the battle, and in fact I had actually done enough at that airfield for the incoming bomber flight, which you probably didn't see, but was making its way to that airfield as I was waiting to respawn to take it. So we're now 3 sectors to 2 up, and we've got a good chance of taking the command centre as well, so we might be able to turn this round, even though we're a long way behind. Now the score line is already in, so I'm determined to get this bomber out, and I'll be looking for bombers and ground attackers to take them out to reduce the enemy's ability to recapture sectors. Going as fast as I can, climbing quite steeply. The bomber did the same, but of course it's a B-17G as opposed to something like the P-2M82, which might have made a better fist of this. Down he goes. That's him out of the game. Looking around to see what else is available. And talking of the ground attackers, both of them are below me. One of them's on very low health, so I probably won't go for that one. We'll see if we can get the IL-2. We begin to pelt it from above. Don't go too close to the ground here, otherwise there's a serious chance of crashing into it. We were briefly 4-1 up there. We have captured that command centre. Then we went back to 3-2, and even as I speak, we're now back up to 4-1. We're beginning to overhaul the enemy's rather sizable lead, finally. And that's the ground attacker out. He won't be coming back. I get a haircut from the boomerang that flies across my face. Or a beard shave if he's flying across my face. I want to take out, probably, to be on the safe side, a couple of these bombers, so that probably the sector will survive a second attack if it happens to reach here. So the next job is whittle away a couple of these bombers. Of course, these count towards your class-specific missions, although I've already finished with those since I've already got the hero of the sky. Yet another fire. Finish off that bomber. Now begin to shoot a second one. And I'm able to kill that in one pass. Swing round to see if I want to do any more, but the bombers have already done their work. As you can tell from the fact that they aren't highlighted anymore. I decided to take the damage anyway on one of them, since we now are beginning to overhaul the enemy. We're very close, only 21 points behind, with 4 sectors to 1 advantage, so it won't be long before we're back on top. They've only got 3 aircraft left. You can see me checking. Now I'm beginning to look around for those. See if we can get this battle finished off by killing the enemy in its entirety. And now they're down to 2. I know where one of them is, so I'm heading towards that. Somebody's pinging the bombers, but it's not really necessary. But the Corsair's coming in. So instead of going for the Spitfire, which is below me in low energy configuration, I decided to actually do the opposite and go from a low energy configuration into fighting a high energy configuration aircraft, the Corsair. Wasn't really aiming at me, fortunately, so I got away with it. Belatedly, the ace goes through, and I would have killed the Corsair there, but as you can see, the battle comes to an end with 20,000 personal points and a glut of medals. Let's review the outcome of this battle. The centre tells us that it was a 5 chevron battle, or a grade 1 heavy fighter, and I received 190,119 credits, or silver if you prefer, of which more than 63,000 came from the premium account bonus. If we look in the message box, we can see there are expenses of 4,000 credits. That was for losing the aircraft once. I was using what I call prepaid consumables, that is, I bought them in advance, half price in a sale. Aircraft experience 5,302, the base there is 2,587, premium count bonus 1,293, and other bonuses adding up to over 1,400 there. 265 free experience, allegedly. The base there is 200, the premium account bonus is 64, and there's an odd one peeking in from somewhere, I know not where. No tokens on this occasion, but we can see that there are some achievements such as the Maguire Medal, the Ace, the Winged Legend, McCampbell, and the Hero of the Sky. Personal score tab, we can see that all 3 of the class specific missions were completed. That's the 5 chevrons very easily. 20,640 personal points with 4 sectors captured, 21 aerial targets destroyed, dealing 11,258 damage to those with 28 critical hits. We lost the aircraft once and capture points 700. That was divided 160 for defending, 540 for attacking. On the team score tab, we can see that that was enough to be first on my team, both by personal points and by chevrons. Would have been the case on the enemy team as well. Some good contributions coming here. The bomber, the PE2 M82, making a decent contribution. Down-tiered BF-109E and a strong aircraft, but a big map for it. A good effort there as well. On the enemy side, Spitfire came top. A good effort from the F4U-1 Corsair there. Interesting move from the XP55, and this is the reason why this battle was so hard. You wouldn't have thought the XP55 was necessarily suited to this map, but if we pop into this player, we can see that he actually changed his aircraft. In fact, I shot him down several times in the battle to another bomber, so we were effectively fighting 2 bombers, which is why it was such hard work. It was a good win. That brings me to the end of my reassessment of the P-38L Lightning, and wow, what a plane! Taking the ordnance off and building it for speed brings it to life in a way that I hadn't imagined was possible back in July 2022 when it was introduced into the game. I'd rather fly this American Heavy at Tier 6 than the XP-54. My one regret is that, unlike World of Tanks, you can't swap between builds before battles depending on what you see before you. Wouldn't it be great if you could load it up with ordnance on a map with 1 or 2 mining plants? But I hope you found that useful, and that if you did, you'll come and see my future content. Stick around, there's a bonus battle coming up featuring the use of ordnance, which I hope you will enjoy. But this is the point at which I leave you, so this is the Noble Q signing off.